Hey guys, Michael here. Today, what I'm hoping to do with this video is to talk a little bit about cheese. And if we're going to be talking about cheese, I thought it would make sense to play here as one of the rats. So here we are as Icket Claw. And I'm just curious, I was going to say everybody's favorite legendary lord of the Skaven, Icket Claw, but I'm kind of curious because he's actually not my favorite. Probably my second favorite, though. I'm very curious what other people's favorite Skaven legendary lord is. So if you feel like sharing that, go ahead and make a comment below because I'm just quite curious about that. But anyway, so back to the point. So cheese, rats, Skaven. So there's a couple things that you can do cheese related with respect to Icket Claw. One of them is to deliberately give up Skaven Blight so that you can reoccupy it at a higher tier. I think you can get as high as tier 3 pretty easily by doing that. I don't know, there might be a way to engineer it so that you can even do it higher than that, I guess, if you take a little while to build up a little bit of food first. Anyway, I'm not currently doing that, obviously. Instead, what I am doing is something that came up in yesterday's video, which is I'm farming rebels, and that's what the rest of this video is going to be about. So let's talk a little bit about farming rebels. Now, I want to actually begin with a big disclaimer. That disclaimer is I do not care if you like to use cheese in this game. I know a lot of people enjoy it. You paid for the game. Feel free to enjoy the game however you want to. Having said that, I think there's probably a lot of people who use cheese not because they so much necessarily enjoy it and have thought about it, but I think a lot of people probably end up doing it because they've actually never really given it much thought, except that that's what they see other people do, because obviously there are a lot of YouTubers who do use cheese. And that's fine. Again, no judgment here. But if you're somebody who uses cheese just because that's what you've seen other people do be aware that there are other ways to play the game, and there are quite a few of us who actually do not enjoy the cheesing aspect of the game. Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, it's because obviously yesterday I made a video where I talked about using the mod that is the, let me make sure I can get this right, the Slower Expansion and Settlement Supply Lines mod by Serb. Slower start version, and I talked about how you can use that with the Warriors of Chaos, and I'll jump back here to an example of Warriors of Chaos here in a minute, but I wanted, like I said, I wanted to start with the rats since we're talking about cheese. So using that mod, you can engineer it, obviously. What I was doing in yesterday's video was I was talking about how the debuffs that you get from that mod can actually make Warriors of Chaos feel better. It just brings them down just a tick, just a notch, enough to make them feel to me like a more viable faction to play, as opposed to just being instantly overpowered, which unfortunately they are in vanilla. But that same mod does have, very similar effect on a lot of different races. So I'm using it here in the case of Icket Claw. And what it does is it just gives you a massive public order penalty, amongst other things, whenever you take over a new settlement. So I came down here, I took to borrow. That penalty, we're now on turn 4, so that penalty has worn off at this point. It was actually only 3 turns. I thought it was 5 turns, and I wonder if that's situational. But anyway, we got a massive debuff to both of these 2 settlements that we own, to our public order, as well as to growth and other things as well. But that just makes it a little bit easier to do what I'm doing here, which is I am raiding my own territory. And when I hit the in turn button here, we're going to get a rebellion, and I'm going to attack that army, and I'm going to get a little bit of rewards out of it. I'm going to get some food, I'm going to get some money, I'm going to get some experience out of it. And we could just keep doing that over and over and over in perpetuity, at least until we get threatened by somebody else, which may or may not even happen in this campaign. So yeah, it's a, like I said, it's a pretty easy, effective way to cheese the game a little bit, give yourself a little bit of a head start. Another fairly easy way to cheese the game with Icket Claw is to voluntarily give up Skaven Blight and then take it back over again with a bunch of extra food to occupy it at a higher tier. So my question for all of you, when I saw the comments in yesterday's video, so my video was all about, hey, you know, guys, you can use this as a tool to make Warriors of Chaos feel better, and a lot of people came back and they commented and said, no, that makes the game easier because that actually makes it easier to to just go ahead and force rebels, and you can just farm rebels even easier using that method. And I'll admit, my instinctive reaction to that was, well, yeah, of course, if you're going to cheese the game, you don't need that mod to do it. There's any number of different ways to cheese the game. But yes, that mod could be used to make it easier to cheese the game with respect to farming rebels. But, you know, number one, why would you want to do that? And number two, why are you watching my channel if you... don't get me wrong. I love it when people watch my channel, but you're probably not going to enjoy much of my content if you're a big fan of cheese. So, but then, that was my instinctive reaction. But again, I calmed down after thinking about it for a minute or two, and that's fine. I mean, there might be people who don't consider that cheese, or there might be people who like a little bit of cheese, but there's, a certain line that they draw as to what they won't cheese or whatever. So I'm opening this up for discussion, because I'm genuinely curious what the community thinks about farming rebels and whether or not it's cheese and whether or not it's something that they do a lot. I'm curious whether people do it, again, because they've seen other people do it and they know it's effective, but they haven't necessarily thought through whether or not it's cheese. And so I guess it's also worth mentioning here, because a lot of people at this point are scratching their heads and saying, well, what's wrong with cheese? And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with cheese, except that this game is really, and most games in general, once you figure out how the AI works, once you figure out the exploits, once you figure out sort of how to manipulate, you know what the reaction of the computer is going to be to the different things that you do. Most games can be, let's just say, manipulated. Let's use a nicer word. Most games can be manipulated in different ways, and to a certain extent, that's just getting better at the game, right? And that's what we all strive to do for the most part. But on the other hand, there are certain things that either feel unrealistic or they just feel not very much fun. And in the case of rebel farming, to me, that's both of those. So it's not really realistic. And then I thought it through a little bit, and I thought, okay, well, I can believe there are certain circumstances for certain races or certain legendary lords where maybe rebel farming isn't unrealistic. I think about the greenskins and the fact that they use the raiding stance to help sort of, it used to be fightiness, which I actually liked that word that they used to use, but now I guess it's reputation. But I don't think Khorne gets any benefit out of raiding, but I could be wrong about that. But there's certain factions that I could actually see, it making sense. They don't really care about their own people very much. Sometimes, raiding your own territory might thematically make sense, realistically make sense. But for most factions, most legendary lords, like, can you imagine Emperor Karl Franz raiding Altdorf in order to force rebellions to happen? It just obviously doesn't feel very thematic. So that's the number one thing that, kind of normally prevents me from doing something like this. Then the number two thing is, of course, well, actually, there's three things here. The number two thing is it doesn't really feel very much fun to me. That's, I don't know. It's not super challenging to just defeat rebels over and over again. And then the third thing, of course, is it feels like a suboptimal way to play. I mean, I can understand there being certain circumstances where you could get a benefit from it. And so that brings us back here to Ikiclaw, where I'm going to go ahead and just do this. So let's go ahead and do our research here. I guess I'll finish doing, by the way, I'm using the tech tree expansion here. So let's go ahead and just do that. Imminent Rebellion. This is what I'm talking about. Let's just go ahead and end our turn. We can see the rebellion pop up here somewhere. There it is, right there. So yeah, this is an example of where I can see it being, I don't exactly want to call it optimal, but I can see it providing a little bit of value because the Skaven do like to farm battles for food, and this is obviously a pretty easy way to do it. So I can understand this is one of those examples where it could make sense to do it. But normally speaking, the optimal way to play the game is to try to expand. And if you're spending all your time inside your own territory farming rebels, then you're not really expanding. And the battles themselves don't tend to be as rewarding as they would be if you're taking down, like, you know, the major army of your enemy. So here we go. Here's a rebellion. We got ourselves. By the way, while we are raiding, we are also getting food, so that's beneficial to the Skaven. I'm just going to go ahead and I presume I can auto-resolve this. Yep, decisive victory. Let's go ahead and give this to our Jezzails there. We'll go ahead and auto-resolve. Boom. Nicely done. Quick and easy. Got ourselves a magic item out of it. So yeah, I can see the benefit to this. I'm going to go ahead and take the food, I suppose. But as you can see, other than the fact that we got that magic item, we got a tiny little bit of food out of it. But for the most part, that's not a super rewarding battle. However, we can keep raiding, and we can force it to just... There's going to be a few turns here where we're getting the military crackdown, but it won't be very long before we're going to be able to force another one. And meanwhile, it's only a matter of time before we get another rebellion over here in Skaven Blight. So we can just bounce back and forth between these two territories and farm rebels over and over and over again. So you kind of get the idea. Pretty easy method of cheesing. I'm just genuinely curious whether people do it, whether people think that it actually is an optimal way to play, and whether or not, now having brought up this topic and thinking about it a little bit, would you consider this to be a cheese tactic? I think in my case, I do consider this pretty heavy cheese, except, like I said, in the case of certain legendary lords who it might feel a little bit more thematic for. But even so, I would probably restrict it, because most of the time it's not going to feel like a very optimal way to play. But again, no judgment. Very curious what other people think. I'm going to go ahead and show the example then of the Warriors of Chaos, since that's what started this discussion to begin with. Alrighty, and so here we are in the Azazel campaign. Now, I did want to mention, by the way, going back to the comments about yesterday's video, I hope it's pretty clear. I've said before, I do not mind people disagreeing with me in the videos, and so I did want to say I appreciate the feedback. It actually, generated this discussion. So please go ahead and keep comments like that coming. I don't mind people disagreeing with me, although I will say that, as long as it's done respectfully, not just towards me, but obviously towards each other as well, which yesterday's discussion I think was. But anyway, I don't mind people disagreeing with me as long as you don't mind my disagreeing back. And so anyway, just wanted to make that clear. So the Warriors of Chaos here, like I said, this is an example with the Azazel, but it's actually a little bit even easier to do the cheesing with Warriors of Chaos with respect to the Rebel farming, because of course they get the Gifts of Chaos, and I know at least with Slanesh and with I think it's Tzeentch. I don't know. I don't know if Khorne and Nurgle have the Gift of Chaos that allows you to do as well, but you actually can get a Gift of Chaos that gives you a -10 every turn to your control. So yeah, I mean, that makes it even easier to farm rebels if you want to do that. So here we are with the Azazel, same exact thing as what I was doing with the Claw. I'm just raiding my own territory, farming rebellion. When the rebellion pops up, just go ahead and strengthen ourselves a little bit here and attack the rebels, and get a little bit of experience, a little bit of favor out of it, and easy peasy. Like I said, it's easier to do with Warriors of Chaos if you're using those gifts, and so you could just do this over and over again. But again, it still kind of feels suboptimal to me. Like, I could be using this army to go out and conquer other territory, but again, I'm curious what people's thoughts are, and just to kind of carry this on to its extreme here, I'll go ahead and show that you can just sit here and keep doing it and generate another rebellion just a few turns later. So Do people consider this to be an effective way to play the game? Do they think this is cheese? Any thoughts that you have related to this particular topic, I would certainly appreciate the feedback. So yeah, going back to yesterday's video, you know, that's on me. I should have thought through some of the pushback that was going to happen, but you know, it's fine. I think my point still stands as long as you know, you want to use that particular mod, or you know, the same thing can be applied to other mods that I've talked about as well. You know, some of these mods can absolutely be used to make the game more interesting, more challenging, more compelling, but at the same time, some of them may introduce or make it easier to do certain types of cheese. And so that's kind of something that I don't tend to think about all that much, and so kind of a blind spot for me when I make videos like the one yesterday. But all right, anyway, like I said, always appreciate the feedback. Feel free to share any of your thoughts. Again, let me know what your favorite Skaven Legendary Lord is. I'm just very curious about that. And all right, I think then that's pretty much all I had to say on this particular topic. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Other than that, I will say thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you all in the next video.